Well, this is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. This is study number 24. 3 left to go after this one to complete the story of Joseph, son of Jacob. Now, yesterday, Joseph positioned his children as Jacob, also known as Israel, was about to bless his children. Wait, position them? Well, exactly. Israel couldn't see very well, so what Joseph did was he placed Manasseh on Jacob's right, his firstborn son, so that he would receive the right of the firstborn. That was done with the right hand. Now, to his surprise, Jacob crossed his arm so that his right hand was on Ephraim's head, the second born. Now, why would he do that? How would Joseph react? Well, let's find out. So let's take a look at 48, verse 17 through 22. This will finish chapter 48, by the way, 17 through 22. So when Joseph saw his father placing his right hand on Ephraim's head, he was displeased. So he took hold of his father's hand to move it to Ephraim's head, to Manasseh's head. Joseph said to him, "No, my father, this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He will too become a people, and he too will become great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a group of nations." He blessed them that day and said, "In your name will Israel pronounce the blessing. May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." So notice he says the second child first, the first child second. So he put Ephraim ahead of Manasseh. Verse 21, then Israel said to Joseph, "I am about to die, but God will be with you and take you back to the land of your fathers. And to you I give one more ridge of land than your brothers, the ridge I took from the Amorites with my sword and my bow." All right. Joseph's reaction here was to correct his father, believing that, well, he made a mistake. Now remember, Israel couldn't see well. So Joseph simply says, "No, my father, this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." Now, did you notice Israel's reaction to this? Okay. And the word he used in that reaction, that's what I found interesting. Israel refused. Now, he didn't refuse many things when it came to Joseph, but he refused this. See, because what he did was intentional. He meant to cross his arms. It was also prophetic. I want you to see that. See, Ephraim would receive his blessing of the firstborn just as Jacob had, for he would actually be greater. He said his descendants would become a group of nations, and that is exactly what happened. This is a prophetic moment. God has filled Jacob with his spirit. For many years later, the people of Israel would actually split into two nations. Now, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom is what they were often referred to, but the Bible also calls them Judah and Ephraim. Now, Judah was the smaller of the two nations, if you will. Judah was just made up of two tribes. Ephraim was a far larger nation made up of the rest, including Manasseh, named after Ephraim's older brother. His descendants became a nation, or a group of them, along with 9 other tribes. So definitely what Jacob has done here, Israel has done, is very prophetic. Now, this also seemed to run in the family. Jacob was born second, and he was put ahead of his older brother Esau. Joseph's mother, Rachel, was born second and was put ahead of her older sister Leah. Now, Ephraim, though born second, was put ahead of Manasseh, the firstborn. So, notice something here. No argument comes from Joseph, for he was Israel's 11th son, yet received the blessing of the firstborn, as we have seen and will again see in this passage. Now, Joseph put this all in stride, but then he gets some information here that may have been hard for him to hear. He receives word on what's going to soon happen to Jacob. He is about to die, and he knows it. You know, people are not always aware of such things. We don't know when it's our time, I think, for the most part. But that being said, and even though I do say that, I have met people who knew they would soon die and told their loved ones about it. Have you? Have you ever experienced that? He will soon gather all of his sons together to tell them he's going to die, but Joseph is the first to hear of it. Now, verse 22 reveals another blessing that Joseph will receive through his sons. He will inherit an additional ridge of land, or as the New King James Version calls it, a portion of land. Now, there's a bit of controversy with this passage. Linda Hinton is a good commentator because she's consistent. I don't always agree with what she said, but I'll give her credit for consistency. She believes Genesis was written by several writers, and not all were historically correct. She points out that Jacob, as he was known then, never took any land from the Amorites by his sword. He purchased land, but he never got them by his sword. She sees this passage as an error then, and not the first time she's pointed that out. She says it was actually his sons who took land and did it by the sword. So, quite frankly, I kind of understand where, her theory comes from. Jacob purchased land, never took it by the sword. Now, that being said, his sons did. His sons did, which means Jacob received that part as his territory. Even though his sons were the ones who did it, Jacob still got that land. But it was his sons that did it. Now, let's start chapter 49 in this video. It's a very smooth transition, so it makes sense not to have such a short time together. We're only at the 7-minute mark here. So it gives us an opportunity to finish chapter 49 this week, because I'll be able to finish that next time. So let's do 49, 1 through 7. That's all, just the 7 verses, because there's a lot here, as you'll see. Then Jacob called for his sons and said, "Gather around so I can tell you what will happen to you in the days to come. Assemble and listen, sons of Jacob. Listen to your father Israel. Reuben, you are my firstborn. You are my might, the first sign of my strength, excelling in honor, excelling in power. Turbulent as the waters, you will no longer excel. For you went up onto your father's bed, onto my couch, and you defiled it. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are weapons of violence. Let them not enter the council. Let me not join their assembly. For they have killed men in their anger and hamstrung oxen as they pleased." Verse 7 now. Cursed by their anger so fierce, and with their fury so cruel, I will scatter them in Jacob and disperse them in Israel. Well, what can I say about this? Zondervan Study Bible feels this is a blessing of Jacob's son. Does this sound like a blessing to you? Doesn't sound like a blessing to me so far. Hinton calls it a poem, which I think is a good description because it's very poetic in the way that it's written. And it fits. I think that's a good way of looking at it. Now, MacArthur sees it as prophetic. And I could not agree with him more. Verse 1 makes it clear. This is what will happen to them in the days to come. So this is really a prophecy here. A prophetic poem, if you will, but still a prophecy. Jacob is a prophet. Now, we've seen that already. We saw it last chapter, and it's very clear in this one. This is what will happen in the future. And, by the way, some of it's not pretty, is it? I mean, you've heard some really difficult things here. How difficult it must have been for some of the brothers to hear such things? Well, that's why I chose to end at verse 7. See, the chapter will sometimes take on a different tone, which you're going to see next time. But I wanted you to get a sense of where it's going. And there's a lot here, so let's get into it. All right? Now, when you look at this, it first appears that is in the order of the sons, because Reuben's first, and Reuben was indeed the firstborn. But that being said, it is not in the order of the birth of the sons. It's actually in the order of the mothers. Okay? So Israel's sons' mothers is how this list is arranged. Leah's sons comes first, then Bilhah, then Zilpah, and then it ends with Rachel. So not all the boys are listed in order of their birth. So Reuben is obviously where we're going to start here. But we see that he lost his birthright due to sin. He slept with his father's wife, Bilhah, and forfeited his birthright. And that's what Hinton and MacArthur both believe. He once excelled, but he was turbulent as the waters. Literally, the word translated that we say in English is turbulent means boiling water. Now, isn't that turbulent? I think this is a really good description and a good choice by the NIV of words. Now, if you enjoy the ocean as much as I do, you've seen it. The way water can toss a ship, the way the sea can toss a ship, it's certainly turbulent. And it looks a great deal, well, it looks a lot like boiling water. His turbulence took away from his excellence. And we have to make sure that we don't do that. I mean, there's times where we get frustrated. There's times where we get upset. But is it really going to change things? Is it really going to make a difference? What happened here is that because he was so turbulent, it took away from what he did well. And you and I want to make sure that we never get ourselves in a situation like that. Now, what you need to understand is it's not just personal things that are being said in this poem. It's also, again, prophetic things that are being said. So when he talks about Reuben, now he's going to talk about the section of land that will become Reuben's portion, if you will. And it doesn't get mentioned in the Old Testament very much. It does get mentioned, but not in a good way. Moses prayed that they would not die out, but they did. What happened to the Reubenites is that they were absorbed into Moab. Now, the Moabites, who were descendants of Lot. You remember the story of Lot from Genesis? So basically Lot was going to go to Sodom and Gomorrah, was told not to by God. And his wife did look at it, the destruction, and turned into a pillar of salt. Now, the Moabites were descended from Lot. And Reuben became a part of that people, which is very fitting because just like Reuben, the Moabites were a very turbulent people. Now, the next two sons that are mentioned are Simeon and Levi. And they're lumped together because they were very, very similar. They were both very violent. That word was described. Angry, cruel, all these words were used by the NIV. And that's the Zondervan Study Bible kind of puts them all together because they were both very similar in that way. They sinned in Shechem, killing by the sword, and were even violent toward animals, which I think is horrible, but I mean, they were. These verses mention oxen and the fact that they were hamstrung. So in other words, what they did was they cut the tendons of the animal's legs so they could not be used. They could not be useful anymore to anyone. So it was really against people, but the poor animals caught the brunt of that. Now, the fates of their descendants, however, were very, very different. The two were similar in their personalities, but when we come to prophetically looking at what their descendants will be like, well, that's where all the similarities stop. You see, Simeon inherited the smallest part of the land, and eventually his descendants were absorbed by Judah, his brother, Judah. Now, however, the descendants of Levi, now that was different. See, what happened was Aaron was a descendant of Levi. Aaron became a priest. You remember the stories of Moses and Aaron from Exodus. So Aaron became a priest, and the Levites became his priestly line, but really they were descendants of Levi. Now, the situation here with them is they didn't get any land, none. So even his brother Simeon got some land. The Levites got none. They lived in cities of refuge, and they were all over Israel. But that being said, many of them faithfully served God. Now, we'll see that this poem has elements of blessing, like the Zondervan Study Bible says, because next time when we start, we're going to start with the blessing of their brother Judah. So we will start with the story of Judah's blessing next time. Until then, God bless you, and may you have a wonderful week in the Lord. Amen.